My name is Hannah Turner. I'm 33 years old, and I make my living walking into manufacturing companies when their supply chains are already falling apart and finding a way to keep them alive. I'm good at fixing expensive problems. Apparently, for the last 4 years, my biggest one had been my own family. 3 days before Christmas, my brother called while I was reviewing a contract and said almost casually, "Don't come Thursday. This gala is no place for peasants." I thought he was joking. He wasn't. He explained that investors, club members, and important people would be there. And my practical clothes, ordinary car, and refusal to play status games didn't fit the image he and his wife were building. I stared at the spreadsheet open on my laptop. One line showed the monthly transfer covering his luxury rental. Another covered private school tuition. A third reimbursed his wife's Porsche lease. 4 years of payments. Hundreds of thousands of dollars quietly financing a life he apparently considered too sophisticated for me to enter. "So, I'm embarrassing?" I asked. He laughed. "You're successful in your own way, Hannah. But this crowd is different." Something inside me became very calm. "You're right," I said. "True elites fund their own luxury." He went silent. I ended the call, opened my banking dashboard, and dialed one number. "Remove every recurring family support transfer effective immediately." Rent, cancel. Tuition subsidy, cancel. Porsche reimbursement, cancel. But what I discovered afterward made those cancellations look insignificant, because my brother hadn't merely been spending my money. He had been using it to convince Chicago's wealthiest people that he was someone he had never been. Before I tell you what he did next, and what happened when that carefully built image started collapsing in front of the people he wanted to impress, tell me, what time is it where you are right now, and where are you watching from? I want to see how far this story travels. 4 years earlier, none of this had looked sinister. Grant Turner was 2 years older than me, charismatic in the effortless way I never cared to be. He remembered bartenders' names, wore jackets that always looked tailored, and could make someone he met 5 minutes earlier feel like an old friend. I preferred numbers, deadlines, repairable problems, and people who meant what they said. After 10 years in operations consulting, I had built a specialized practice helping mid-sized manufacturers recover from supplier failures, plant disruptions, and disastrous expansion plans. The work was brutal, but successful restructuring contracts paid extremely well. I lived below my means because uncertainty came with the job. Grant saw that as proof I had money sitting around unused. His trouble began when the commercial development firm where he worked downsized. He said he only needed temporary help while searching for another position. Their lease was coming due, the school year had already started, and his wife Vanessa had left marketing to build a luxury event consultancy. Grant asked for 3 months. I agreed to 6. I created a separate family support account. Every month it sent $6,800 toward their rental house in Hinsdale. Twice a year it covered part of the private school tuition. When Vanessa needed another vehicle, Grant insisted a Porsche Cayenne was important for her client image and promised he would assume the lease after returning to full-time employment. I agreed to reimburse it for 1 year. That year became 4. At first, every transfer produced gratitude. "You saved us. I'll never forget this. Just until I'm stable." Vanessa even mailed me a handwritten Christmas card. By year 2, the thank yous stopped. By year 3, Grant no longer asked before sending unexpected bills. Club fees, summer programs, home security upgrades, deposits for Vanessa's business events. I rejected most extras, but kept the original commitments because I told myself I was protecting family stability, not financing vanity. Grant never told the children I was paying, supposedly because it embarrassed him. I respected that. What I didn't know was that he was giving everyone else a very different explanation. The house supposedly reflected his success in private real estate investments. Tuition allegedly came from a family education trust. Vanessa's Porsche was described as a business vehicle purchased after one of Grant's successful deals. They weren't simply hiding my help. They were replacing me with a fictional version of Grant. The first warning came at a summer fundraiser when a stranger congratulated Grant on another strong quarter. Grant smiled and replied, "We've been fortunate." Later, I asked what he meant. He shrugged. "Networking language, everybody exaggerates." It bothered me, but I was buried in work and let it go. Then came Christmas. Grant and Vanessa spent months planning what began as a family dinner and somehow evolved into a formal private club gala. Vanessa ordered embossed invitations. Grant rented a vintage watch. They hired a photographer and discussed a string quartet. 2 weeks before Christmas, Grant asked what I planned to wear. When I mentioned a navy dress I already owned, he suggested something more directional. Vanessa later texted me designer options costing thousands. I ignored them. Then Grant called and removed me from Christmas entirely. What would you have heard in his words? A stupid insult? Embarrassment? Or the moment someone finally admitted they valued the lifestyle you provided more than the person providing it? For years, I had responded to Grant's excuses. That afternoon, I finally responded to his behavior. The first person I called after Grant was Maya Reynolds, my closest friend and the forensic accountant who handled bookkeeping for my consulting practice. She had warned me about the family support account more than once, not because I couldn't afford it, but because undefined financial arrangements tend to become permanent. "Tell me exactly what you want stopped," she said. "Anything that exists only because I agreed to subsidize Grant." The rental payment was simple. The lease was in Grant and Vanessa's names. I merely transferred money before rent was due. Stopped. The Porsche reimbursement worked the same way. Stopped. Tuition required more care because I had already prepaid part of the current semester. I refused to disrupt anything already covered, so only future payments would end. I wanted Grant facing his decisions, not innocent people facing chaos. Then Maya paused. "Hannah, what is GT Strategic Holdings?" I had never heard of it. She showed me 11 monthly transfers of $2,500, each labeled housing adjustment. I remembered Grant saying property tax changes had increased their rent. He had sent me a revised total while I was overseas managing a supplier crisis, and I approved it without studying the destination. "Pull the lease," I said. 20 minutes later, everything changed. The rent had never increased. Grant had raised the amount he requested from me and redirected the extra $2,500 into a company he controlled. Public records showed GT Strategic Holdings had been registered 18 months earlier using a mailbox address. Grant was listed as manager. "This doesn't automatically mean anything illegal," Maya warned, "but he lied about where your money was going." Being called a peasant was insulting. Discovering that my brother had manufactured an expense to extract additional money from me was different. Suddenly, I remembered every urgent call, every invoice pushed through while I was traveling, every time he claimed the children's stability depended on me not asking too many questions. Maya and I reconstructed the account. The supposed tuition technology assessment included a voluntary fundraising contribution. A mandatory security expense turned out to be a premium monitoring upgrade. A Porsche insurance increase included detailing and premium storage. None of it would bankrupt me. That wasn't the issue. Grant had discovered that when he labeled luxury as necessity, I usually paid quickly. At 7:14 that evening, he called. I didn't answer. Then again. Then texts arrived. "Did you change something with the rent transfer? Call me. Hannah, this isn't funny." For a man who thought I was too embarrassing for Christmas, he suddenly cared where I was. The next morning, I answered. His first words were, "What did you do?" "I corrected my expenses." "You canceled the rent." "No. I canceled my contribution to your rent." He said Vanessa had vendors to pay and complained he couldn't move money around quickly enough. That caught my attention. Why would your house payment affect Vanessa's gala vendors? Silence. I mentioned GT Strategic Holdings. The silence became longer. Finally, he said it was investment capital. You told me it was rent. I was going to repay you after a deal closed. What deal? Another silence. That was the first time I heard fear in my brother's voice. He asked to meet. I agreed. Not because I was reconsidering anything, but because I needed to know how far his deception had gone. Before hanging up, he said, "Whatever you think of me, don't embarrass Vanessa at Christmas." "I won't," I said. He exhaled. "But I'm not going to lie for either of you." Grant chose the restaurant. Of course he did. It was the kind of place where the hostess knew him by name and the menu didn't include dollar signs, although I later discovered he had not been there in nearly a year. He arrived wearing a charcoal coat, polished loafers, and the expensive watch I knew he had rented for the Christmas event. Nothing about him looked financially frightened until he sat down. Then I noticed the constant tapping of his thumb against the edge of his phone. He began with nostalgia. He reminded me how close we had been after our father died. He talked about how he had driven me to college, how I had once called him after a disastrous first job interview, how family was supposed to forgive mistakes. For 10 minutes he tried to turn history into a payment plan. I let him finish. Then I slid a folder across the table. Inside were 11 transfers to GT Strategic Holdings, copies of the actual lease, and the emails in which he had claimed the rent increase was mandatory. Grant stared at the first page but didn't touch it. "Tell me what the company does," I said. He leaned back. "It's complicated." "That usually means the answer is bad. It's a private investment vehicle." "For what investments?" "Deals, introductions, small equity positions." "Show me one." His jaw tightened. "You don't understand the world I'm operating in." That sentence almost impressed me. 24 hours earlier, I had been too much of a peasant for his gala. Now, I was apparently too unsophisticated to understand why money stolen from my trust constituted an investment strategy. Grant finally admitted that GT Strategic Holdings had been created because he was trying to establish himself as an independent deal broker. He had been attending private dinners, development conferences, charity events, and club gatherings where wealthy investors met casually. Most of those people assumed Grant already had significant capital because of his house, school choices, vacations, Vanessa's vehicle, and the way he spoke about his portfolio. Correcting them would have weakened his access, so he didn't. "Did you explicitly tell them you owned investments you didn't own?" I asked. He rubbed his forehead. "I let people make assumptions." "Did you use my money to reinforce those assumptions?" "I used family resources to build something." "No. You used my resources to build your reputation." He looked toward the bar before answering. "Reputation creates opportunity." "And what did opportunity create?" His face changed. That was the question. Grant had no meaningful deals. He had introductions, promises, and what he called a pipeline. He had paid for dinners, sponsorships, club fees, golf outings, and deposits to place himself in rooms where he believed a transaction would eventually materialize. The extra $2,500 a month from me had financed that illusion. Other bills had been carried on credit cards. Vanessa's event business earned money, but not enough to support their spending. They were living several months ahead of reality, convinced the next connection would rescue them. Then Grant said something that made the entire situation click into place. The Christmas gala was supposed to change things. I stared at him. He explained that several potential investors were attending: a retired developer, a logistics executive, 2 private equity partners, a local family office director. Grant wanted the evening to establish him as someone worth backing on future real estate deals. The rented watch, the private club, the photographer, the expensive wine, the carefully selected guest list. It was all theater designed to create credibility. "And I didn't fit the theater," I said. Grant didn't deny it. "Because I know you don't own the house." Silence. "I know Vanessa's Porsche comes out of money I send." Silence. "I know the school tuition isn't from a trust." He looked directly at me. You have a habit of telling the truth at the worst possible moment. There it was. He had not uninvited me because my dress was inexpensive. He had uninvited me because I was evidence. The realization hurt more than the word peasant ever could. For 4 years I had believed Grant hid my assistance because accepting help embarrassed him. In reality, he had hidden me because his social identity depended on my absence. Were you ever going to tell those people the truth? I asked. When I closed something, it wouldn't matter anymore. So the plan was to become successful before anyone discovered you weren't already successful. He gave me an irritated look. That's how half the world works? No, half the world markets confidence. You marketed assets. Grant leaned forward. Please, restore the transfers for 90 days. I have 2 real opportunities. Give me 1/4 and I can fix everything. There was a time when that request would have worked. He knew exactly which words to use. Temporary, opportunity, family. Almost there. But now I understood that every rescue had postponed the day he needed to become honest. No. His face hardened. Then you're going to destroy me over a Christmas invitation. No, Grant. If canceling my money destroys you, then you built your life out of my money. People at the next table went quiet. Grant noticed. His expression immediately softened because appearances still mattered even in collapse. That was when I understood something else. I didn't need to expose him. I didn't need to make a scene. I only had to stop participating. Reality was already on its way. For the next 48 hours, Grant tried every version of the same strategy except honesty. First came anger, then guilt, then urgency, then affection. He sent childhood photographs. He reminded me of holidays at our grandmother's house. He forwarded an old message where I had promised I would always be there. When none of that restored the transfers, Vanessa called. It was the first time she had contacted me directly in months. Hannah, I know Grant handled this badly. I almost admired the phrasing. Not lied, not exploited. Handled badly. She continued. But canceling everything days before the gala puts me in an impossible position. Why? Because deposits are due. Then pay them. She went silent. I asked the question Grant had avoided. Vanessa, how much of this gala is already paid for? Her answer came carefully. Some. How much? Hannah. How much? Less than half. The club required the final catering balance 48 hours before the event. The florist needed payment. The photographer had only received a deposit. The rental company holding several decorative pieces needed the remaining balance. Grant and Vanessa had built a Christmas gala for wealthy people using invoices they expected future money to solve. My money. Vanessa became defensive when I asked whether she knew Grant had lied about the rent. She said she knew about GT Strategic Holdings but believed the extra money was something Grant had worked out with me. I couldn't prove otherwise, and unlike Grant, I wasn't interested in inventing certainty. But then she said, "You have to understand how important Thursday is for us." I replied, "You have to understand how unimportant Thursday is for me." That conversation ended without resolution. Christmas Eve morning, something unexpected happened. One of Grant's guests called me. His name was Daniel Mercer, a logistics executive I had worked with 2 years earlier during a warehouse network restructuring. We weren't friends, but we respected each other professionally. He sounded confused. Hannah, I didn't realize Grant Turner was your brother. My stomach tightened. How did that come up? He mentioned you. That was new? According to Daniel, Grant had told several guests that I was a silent investor in GT Strategic Holdings and that my consulting network helped originate opportunities for him. In other words, after excluding me from the gala because my presence threatened his story, Grant had apparently decided my professional reputation might still be useful in my absence. Daniel wanted to know whether I was involved in Grant's company. No. Have you invested in his deals? No. Has your firm sourced transactions for him? No. There was a pause. Then Daniel asked, "Do you mind if I ask why he would say that?" I could have detonated everything in one sentence. I could have told him about the rent, the Porsche, the school, the fake increase, all of it. Instead I said, That's a question Grant should answer. What I can tell you is that neither I nor my firm has any business relationship with GT Strategic Holdings, and Grant does not have permission to represent otherwise. Daniel thanked me and ended the call. 20 minutes later, Grant called 17 times. I answered the 18th. What did you say to Daniel? The truth. You just cost me a meeting. No, whatever you told him cost you a meeting. He thinks I misrepresented our relationship. Did you? Grant began talking rapidly. He claimed he had only said I had supported him, that Daniel had misunderstood, that business conversations were informal, that everyone used family connections. But his panic told me Daniel had not been the only person asking questions. Then Grant made the mistake that ended my remaining sympathy. If you would just come tonight and act supportive, we can fix this. I laughed once because I genuinely couldn't believe what I had heard. You uninvited me. That was before. Before what? Before people knew you were connected to me. The words landed harder than he realized. Before, I was a peasant who weakened his image. Now, because a respected executive knew my work, I had become useful again. I said no. The gala went forward, but not as planned. Grant found enough money through credit cards and a short-term loan to pay the club. Several decorative vendors were reduced. Vanessa returned part of the floral order. The photographer shortened his hours. None of that mattered to the guests. What mattered was that Daniel Mercer quietly withdrew, and 2 other invitees followed after hearing questions about Grant's business claims. I did not attend. I spent Christmas Eve at Maya's home with 6 people, takeout, mismatched plates, and a ridiculous board game. At 9:42 p.m., my phone lit up with a photograph someone had posted publicly from Grant's gala. He stood beneath a gold banner beside Vanessa, both smiling perfectly. For 10 seconds, I wondered if I had miscalculated. Maybe appearances really were enough. Maybe Grant would survive the night, make his connections, and tell everyone his jealous sister had tried to sabotage him. Then Maya pointed to something in the background of the photograph. A man was speaking to Daniel Mercer near the club entrance. Daniel had not attended the dinner, but he had apparently come by long enough to speak with someone. The next morning, Grant sent me one message. You had no right, no explanation, no Merry Christmas, no apology, just accusation. That was when I knew the gala had not saved him. It had introduced the right people to the wrong questions. January dismantled Grant's fantasy far more efficiently than I ever could. First came the rental payment. Without my $6,800 transfer, he covered it by moving money between accounts and taking a cash advance. Then came the Porsche. Then the next school billing period. Everything I had already committed to remained covered, but future arrangements belonged to Grant and Vanessa. The school offered a payment plan. Grant found that humiliating. I found it normal. GT Strategic Holdings faced a more serious problem. Once Daniel questioned Grant's claims, other people began verifying them. One potential investor requested completed transactions. Grant had none. Another requested financial records. There was little beyond expenses. A developer considering Grant for a partnership asked whether I financially backed the business. When the answer was no, he walked away. Grant's network didn't collapse because he lacked wealth. It collapsed because nobody knew which parts of his story were true. By late January, Vanessa moved out of the Hinsdale house. She told me herself when we met near my office. I didn't know all of it, she said. She admitted knowing I helped with the house, tuition, and Porsche, but claimed Grant told her the additional transfers were legitimate business loans. I believed parts of her explanation and remained uncertain about others. For once, I didn't feel responsible for filling the gaps. Vanessa had discovered credit cards she didn't know existed, unpaid club dues, loans, and event expenses Grant promised future deals would cover. I kept thinking the next deal was real, she admitted. So did he. She asked whether I hated them. No, I hate what happened. But hatred would still make your life the center of mine. That was when I understood what my revenge actually was. It wasn't watching Grant lose things. It was refusing to build my own life around preventing him from losing them. Vanessa rented a smaller townhouse and returned to contract marketing. The Porsche eventually went back through an expensive early termination. The luxury house lease ended. The children changed schools the following academic year because the tuition no longer made financial sense. The disaster Grant predicted never arrived. Their lives simply became more ordinary. Grant handled that badly. He told relatives I had withdrawn financing without warning and sabotaged his company because I resented his connections. I did something he never expected. Nothing. No screenshots. No family-wide defense. No social media battle. I kept the documents in case I needed them, but refused to participate in his public relations war. Without an opponent, Grant had to answer real questions himself. Why was the house suddenly unaffordable? Why had investors believed Hannah was involved? Why did GT Strategic Holdings have no completed deals? People reached their own conclusions. In February, the private club suspended Grant after missed payments. In March, Vanessa formally separated from him. In April, GT Strategic Holdings was dissolved. Grant sold several luxury items and moved into a one-bedroom apartment near a new job. For the first time in years, he accepted a salaried business development position at a regional building products distributor. No private equity dinners, no country club introductions. Nobody cared about his watch. He hated it at first. Then, slowly, he became good at it. That complicated my anger. Revenge stories are easier when the person who hurt you stays terrible forever. Real people sometimes change once consequences remove the stage they were performing on. Grant didn't contact me for nearly 5 months. Then one August evening, he appeared outside my condo in an ordinary shirt, no expensive watch, looking older. "I'm not here for money," he said immediately. I let him in. "I was angry at you for months. I thought you ruined my life." I stayed silent. Then I had to explain GT Strategic Holdings during a job interview. I heard myself describing the rent increase, the networking expenses, what I told people about you. Halfway through, I realized I sounded insane. "Not insane," I said, entitled. Grant nodded. For once, he didn't negotiate after admitting I was right. Then I asked the question that had stayed with me. "Why did you call me a peasant?" His eyes dropped. "Because you scared me." I didn't understand. You could walk into that gala wearing a $60 dress, talk intelligently to anyone there, and not care whether they approved of you. I was spending thousands trying to look like I belonged. You didn't need any of it. For years, I thought Grant looked down on me. The truth was sadder. He needed to look down on me because admitting he depended on me would have destroyed the person he was pretending to be. Grant apologized, but I didn't give him instant forgiveness. I told him I accepted the apology as a beginning, not an eraser. He agreed to repay the $27,500 he had falsely represented as increased rent. We wrote down the total and created a modest monthly payment schedule. I didn't demand repayment for the legitimate support I had knowingly provided over the previous 4 years. Those payments had been my decisions, even if I regretted them. The distinction mattered. I was responsible for what I freely chose. Grant was responsible for what he concealed. His first repayment was $250. Years earlier, that amount would have looked meaningless beside everything I transferred. Now it meant more than any thank you note he had ever sent, because for once, the money was moving in the other direction for the right reason. Grant and Vanessa eventually divorced, though their relationship became more respectful once financial panic stopped controlling every conversation. Vanessa rebuilt her event marketing work on a smaller scale. Grant stayed at the building products company and later earned a promotion. He stopped describing himself as an investor. When people asked what he did, he told them exactly what he did. Our relationship rebuilt much more slowly. First occasional coffee, then dinner. Eventually Thanksgiving with relatives. Nobody staged a dramatic family reconciliation. The change appeared in smaller ways. Grant paid his own share. He stopped transforming inconvenience into emergency. If he couldn't afford something, he didn't buy it. Ordinary behavior, but for Grant, ordinary was revolutionary. I permanently closed the family support account. Part of the money that once disappeared into Grant's lifestyle went into my retirement portfolio. Another portion went into a scholarship fund for students entering operations and skilled manufacturing programs. I also took something I had postponed for years, an entire month away from clients. Money no longer spent protecting another person from consequences could finally become time returned to my own life. The following Christmas, Grant invited me to dinner. Not a gala. Dinner. 8 people, a discount store table, badly cooked pasta, supermarket pie, and no photographer. At one point, he lifted his glass and I immediately narrowed my eyes. He laughed. Relax. No speech. Then he said quietly, "When you canceled the money, I thought losing the house was the disaster. Then the club. Then the company. Then my marriage." But the worst part was realizing none of those things had made me impressive. I was borrowing money to impress people who probably would have respected me more if I had just told the truth. I remembered his words from the previous Christmas. "This gala is no place for peasants." At the time, I heard contempt. Now I heard fear. The fear of being ordinary, exposed and discovered without the correct house, car, school, club, or guest list. Grant had been wrong about himself. There was something worth respecting underneath all of that, but he nearly buried it beneath a lifestyle he couldn't finance. I learned something uncomfortable too. Boundaries are easy to praise after they succeed. They're harder when enforcing them makes someone you love angry, afraid, or disappointed. For years, I confused helping with preventing consequences. Every time Grant approached reality, I pushed the deadline farther away. Sometimes my generosity helped him. Other times, generosity without limits simply made his dishonesty cheaper. Grant lied to me and manipulated my trust. Those decisions belonged to him. But I kept volunteering for a role that was destroying my respect for both of us. Ending that role was the only part I could control. People sometimes ask whether I regret shutting off the money so suddenly. I don't. I regret not giving the arrangement an expiration date 4 years earlier. I regret failing to demand documentation when the bills changed. I regret allowing guilt to answer financial questions that should have been answered with facts. But I don't regret refusing to finance a lie. Love doesn't require you to subsidize someone's image. Loyalty doesn't mean protecting another adult from every consequence. A healthy boundary isn't revenge simply because someone who benefited from your lack of boundaries experiences it as punishment. Real help should make a person stronger, more honest, and more independent. Not allow them to build a lifestyle that survives only while you remain silent. Grant once thought being elite meant having the correct address, car, guest list, and the authority to decide who looked worthy enough to enter the room. I see it differently now. There's nothing impressive about luxury you can't sustain, nothing sophisticated about status built on deception, and nothing poor about living within your means while refusing to trade self-respect for approval. A year after that first phone call, Grant sent me a photograph before Christmas dinner. His kitchen counter was covered in grocery bags beside a handwritten shopping list. Underneath, he wrote, "Paid for everything myself. Thought you'd appreciate that." I did. I replied with one word: elite. So tell me, if someone you loved had depended on your money for years and then excluded you because you didn't look wealthy enough for the image they were selling, would you have canceled everything that day or given them one final chance? And maybe the harder question is this: when does helping family stop being generosity and start becoming permission for them to never change? For me, the answer arrived 3 days before Christmas. It sounded like one phone call. Cancel, cancel, cancel. But what I was really canceling was the belief that I had to pay for someone else's approval to remain part of my own family.
We hope the story stayed with you beyond the ending. Everything here is fictional and created on for storytelling and occasional entertainment. We hope it reminds you that people can disappoint you and still expect you to remain the same gentle version they benefited from. Growth means you are allowed to become more careful without apologizing for it.